beginning of the recitation is in Arabic, and then I'll read the translation. This is from the 49th chapter called Surah Al-Hujurat. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا أن تصيبوا قوما بجهالة فتصبحوا على ما فعلتم نادمين واعلموا أن فيكم رسول الله لو يطيعكم في كثير من الأمر لعنتم ولكن الله حبب إليكم الإيمان وزينه في قلوبكم وكره إليكم الكفر والفسوق والعصيان أولئك هم الراشدون فضلا من الله ونعمة والله عليم حكيم وإن طائفتان من المؤمنين اقتتلوا فأصلحوا بينهما فإن بغت إحداهما على الأخرى فقاتلوا التي تبغي حتى تفيء إلى أمر الله فإن فاءت فأصلحوا بينهما بالعدل وأقسطوا إن الله يحب المقسطين صدق الله العلي العظيم. In the name of the one God, the most gracious, the most merciful, O you who have believed, if there comes to you a disobedient one with information, investigate, lest you harm the people out of ignorance and become over what you have done regretful. And know that among you is the messenger of God. If he were to obey you in much of the matter, you would be in difficulty. But God has engaged you the faith and has made it pleasing in your hearts and has made it hateful to you to disbelieve, defy, and to commit disobedience. Those are the rightly guided. It is a bounty from God and favor, and God is knowing and wise. And if two factions among the believers should fight, then make settlement between the two. But if one of them oppresses the other, then fight against the one that oppresses until it returns to the ordinance of Allah. And if it return, then make settlement between them in justice and act justly. Indeed, Allah loves those who act justly. Indeed, Allah the Most High is spoken the truth.
Michael Prysner is a Iraq veteran and co-founder of March Forward. March Forward is an organization of veterans and active duty soldiers opposed to the war. During the time Prysner was in Iraq, he developed anti-war views, and in 2005, he began organizing against the war. Prysner has become a powerful anti-war commentator, drawing on his experiences in Iraq to prove the criminality of the war. Without further ado, please welcome Michael Prysner.
Well, thanks everyone for having me. I do want to say that, it's absolutely an honor to be speaking at this campus, a college campus that's now known around the world for its heroic stand Israeli war crimes, one that sent really ripples through not just the country, but throughout the entire planet, when everyone around the world saw these heroic students taking a stand against apartheid, against war crimes, and that message didn't just inspire people around the world, but I just returned from a speaking tour in the UK, and really every college campus that I spoke at, people asked me about the Irvine 11, and they weren't just inspired by the actions of the Irvine 11, but they were pushed into action by it. So when I was there and Israel sent one of their top politicians on a speaking tour of campuses in the UK, actually at the same time that I was there, ironically. And this title of this tour was, "Is Israel a Racist State?" And I'll spoil the ending for you, they said no. But the point was this propaganda tour. And the students at a school called Birmingham University in Birmingham, England, who had seen what the Irvine 11 had done, said, "We can do this too. And when this person comes and tries to spread these lies, that we can take a stand too." And so they did the same thing. Except when they did it, it wasn't 11 students, it was about 60 students, and the number of Zionists at that event were about 5, and so the event didn't happen, and it was shut down, and he was driven out. And so the action that happened here carried on to other places and had a real material effect, and was yet another victory, and one that I know will be replicated again. And it's interesting, I think that there's this extreme hypocrisy we're seeing right now as I believe the Irvine 11 are still facing charges for an issue of free speech, where an elected politician, a councilwoman in Orange County, can on video make death threats to Muslims and have absolutely nothing happen. This Deborah Pauly in Via Park, you may have heard of her. When President Bush, I hope to, in this talk, I want to kind of go into both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and kind of the state of permanent war right now that the United States is in. But before I begin, the President Bush declared in 2001 that the war on terror is not a war on Islam. And President Obama actually, just months after being elected, went to Cairo, in Egypt, the largest Muslim country, to say the same exact thing, to say this war on terror is not a war against Islam. But whose countries are being invaded? Whose countries are being bombed mercilessly? Whose children are being ripped to shreds? Whose husbands and sons are being tortured in Abu Ghraib? Whose holy book is being desecrated in those cells? Whose lands are being targeted and attacked by drones? And here in the United States, who's being harassed? Who's being subjected to racism and xenophobia because it is being spewed by the politicians in Washington and their mouthpieces in the mainstream media? Whose places of worship are being spied on and infiltrated? Is it the churches? Is it the synagogues? Or is it the mosques? Whose charities are being shut down and the leaders of those charities being put in prison? Where is this government sending FBI agents to talk to young people and youth, knowing their frustrations about the wars and the occupations in their home countries, and enticing them into saying these provocative things and then sending them away to jail and destroying their lives? Now, I'm not a Muslim or a proponent of any religion, but one cannot look at this picture and say that the war on terror is not a war against Islam. It is a war against Islam. And it's a war against Islam because the heart of the Muslim world is also the heart of the oil industry. And that's what this government cares about. And so, to wage their wars for oil, they also had to wage war against Islam. Now, we just passed a very grim anniversary of 8 years since the invasion and occupation of Iraq. I know I was, many of you may have been in Los Angeles on March 19th, where there is nearly 5,000 people in the streets on the anniversary of the invasion, demanding an immediate end to that war and the war in Afghanistan, the occupation of Palestine. But, you know, the invasion was 8 years ago. But in January, we passed the 20th year anniversary of the U.S. war against Iraq. And so before I go into the current state of the Iraq war, I think maybe we should recap a little history of U.S. policy towards Iraq over not just the past 20 years of bombing and sanctioning and invading the country, but maybe a little further. Now, Iraq ranks in the top 3 countries of the world's oil reserves. And from 1920 to 1958, Iraq was a British colony. And Iraq's oil at this time was 100% foreign owned. Right? Iraq owned 0 of the oil. It was split up between Dutch, French, British, and U.S. oil companies. You know, today's Chevron and Shell and ExxonMobil. And while these countries made billions and billions of dollars from Iraq's oil, there was 90% illiteracy in Iraq. And really, not a single person in Iraq could ever see a doctor. Well, in 1958, there was a popular revolution that overthrew the British-installed monarchy. And in that revolution, they began to nationalize their oil and say that it no longer belongs to these colonizers, it belongs to us. The day that Iraq began nationalizing its oil, the U.S., Britain, other imperialist powers began covert operations to overthrow that government. And by 1963, just a few years later, the CIA succeeded in overthrowing that government, installing one that denationalized Iraq's oil. But then just 5 years later, in 1968, there was another revolution where that imperialist-friendly leader was overthrown. And in 1972, Iraq announced, again, the nationalization of its oil industry. And that very day, actually it was the day before, as the CIA knew this announcement was going to be made, Iraq was placed on the terrorism list. Now, this is not a coincidence that the day they nationalized the oil is the day they become